Now don't say that, because there's those of you when it's 80 degrees in there still have a blanket. Don't say that. We're glad that you're here this morning. If you have your Bibles, you may want to open to the book of Hebrews, Hebrews chapter 13. This being a little bit more unique than usual is I'm not going to keep you in these high quality white chairs for a little while, even though if you remember, they're a little bit better than the orange chairs that used to exist. And by the way, those still do exist. They're just in a different location. They've been in the Chair Witness Protection Program at SCYC, and they look exactly the same. But we're going to talk about leadership today. But first of all, before I do that, I want to encourage you to come and be with us tomorrow. We're going to have a life celebration for Gramps. I've called him John this week. That is weird. That is absolutely weird. We're going to have a life celebration tomorrow at Morgan Funeral Home. I encourage you to come out and to be with us. The visitation is going to start at 12, and we're going to have that service at 2. Then we're going to hit the road, and we're going to head to South Carolina. And so we appreciate your prayers. We've had some family that are coming in. I had the number in my head, but 2 of those family members snuck in this morning that I wasn't expecting. But we're glad that they're with us. But let's talk about some things regarding leadership, if we can, a little bit this morning. And I know that you're probably going to see a lot of scriptures up here. I'm not going to dig into all of those this morning because I want this to set us up for our 12 weeks of leadership that we're going to talk about. We've had 12 weeks of membership. We've had 12 weeks of just a variety of things as we've talked about the church and what is the church and what is membership in the church. And now we're going to talk about leadership. In Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 14, the scripture that you see up here from the New King James Version says, "Where there is no counsel, the people fall." It's very similar to the end of the book of Judges, where it says that everybody did what was right in their own eyes. Now, we've shed this over about the past couple months. If you can imagine what the world would look like, and you may think, well, everybody's already doing that. But if everybody just did what they thought was right, with absolutely no education, no wisdom, nobody that's... Have you ever told somebody this phrase? I don't know if I do that. And you've told them that because of 2 things. Number one, you've done it and it hasn't worked out too well. Or you've seen somebody else do it and it hasn't worked out. All in all, that's part of the issues that when we talk about leadership, we're dealing with this really interesting thing called wisdom. And wisdom is very, very important in leadership. But let's do this. Let's define leadership for a moment. Leadership is actually defined as, if you go down and look in the dictionary, you're going to see this one. It's the act of guiding someone or something. Like if you were a leader over a project, that's what leadership was. You had the ability to guide somebody. Now I'm going to mention a verse to you in the book of Acts, which is actually a verse on guiding somebody. And that word in the Greek that's there also means to lead. So you see a direct representation of that in the book of Acts. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But Napoleon Bonaparte said that a leader is a dealer in hope. And what that really means is, and I just want you to think for a second, either in the church or outside the church, when you had somebody who was a really good leader in your life, they showed you the great things that are going to be ahead. And even though you may not like them where you are right now, they're able to see the great things that are ahead. They're able to motivate you in the direction of where you really need to go. Because when we think about leadership is ultimately amazing, and here's why. There's some importance for leadership, and we see these in the Bible, and as we walk through our 12 weeks of leadership, you're going to see them probably a little bit more clearly than you have before. And the first one is this: without leadership, there is chaos, complete chaos. The end of the book of Judges. Well, you'll hear me say that a lot, because I think that's a realization. Just think of this chaos for a moment. What would happen, and no offense to anybody's children, but if we had a group of 2- and 3-year-olds and we just let them loose in your house with no guidance? Okay, now I'm not saying we're going to do that. Some of you look very, very threatening right now. We're not going to do that. But if we did that, what would that be? That'd be complete chaos. And because the reason is there's no leadership that's there. Now we can all go through the process of it, right? We can all say, okay, this is how we're going to do this, and this is that. But without leadership, there's complete chaos. You could transfer or you could change that word leadership to guidance. Without guidance, there's complete chaos. And here's a biblical example. Do you remember when Moses came down and he saw the children of Israel with a golden calf? You remember that? You ever think about the fact their leaders are gone and they don't know what to do? So when their leaders aren't there, when the people that have been in the forefront, when they're not there anymore, then all of a sudden they look around and they go, hey, we got nothing to do. What do we do? Someone said, hey, I got an idea. Let's make a golden calf. And somebody else went, that sounds like a great idea. And somebody else said, hey, that's perfectly fine. Now, we don't know the exact scheme of how, the plans of how all that happened. We know they built a golden calf. And I'll always say this to the golden calf, probably the ugliest golden calf in the history of mankind. And the reason I say that is, do you think they took a golden calf mold out of Egypt? Because the Israelites had defeated Egypt. They have no need for any Egyptian gods. So they built a golden calf. They made it. They threw their gold in the fire. They made it. They spent time to do it. They fashioned this calf because they didn't know really what to do. They needed something because their leaders were up on top of that mountain. They were that close. But yet, you see the chaos when Moses comes down off the mountain. He says, why have you done this? Remember what they said? It's my favorite excuse in the Bible. It just jumped out of the fire. Okay. Now, you remember when that happened when you were younger? Your parents asked you something and you just, I don't know, I didn't do it. It just happened. I remember my brother, when he was really little, he pulled out all the drawers of the cabinets and he made steps going up to the counter because he couldn't reach it. And he would climb up those steps and he would get in the cookie jar. And my mom one day said, don't pull out the cabinets and make steps anymore. And he went, okay. Mom left and I watched him. Why did I watch him? Because I'm the older brother. That's what you're supposed to do. I was worried about his safety. And I wanted to see him get in trouble. He drug a chair over to the thing. He climbed up on there. He couldn't quite reach it, so he kept trying, pulled out a little cabinet, got up there and climbed up there. And my mom says, what are you doing? Who told you? I don't know. And I laughed and then I got in trouble too. But when you think about it, right? No leadership left, gave rules, but the leadership left, figure out another way to do it. Same thing happens with the children of Israel. We'll see this time and time again. The second one is this: poor leadership will tear down, hinder, and destroy. The Pharisees and the Sadducees during Jesus' time, they beat the people senseless. That's why Jesus uses the term hypocrites. You're telling them to do one thing, but then you guys don't do it. You guys don't follow those directions. So you're hypocrites. No, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And they beat them down so much that it became an authority game. We'll talk about leadership and authority, but it became an authority game. That's why Jesus can look at the people at the end of Matthew chapter 9 and he can say that they look helpless. That he sympathizes with them because he grew up. Remember, he grew up in that environment. So you see the ability to hinder and to destroy, to not follow the ways it is. And last one, without leadership, the work toward division will not be sufficient because there's nobody moving. There's nobody going that direction. We'll see a verse in a few moments from the book of Proverbs where it says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Now, that's the King James. Other translations will say, where there is no divine revelation, the people perish, because there's nothing to look forward to. Prisoners of war in Vietnam and in World War II and in Korea, World War I, they've interviewed a lot of those and they've said, what is it that kept you going? Hope. One of the prisoners in Vietnam in a 3x3 cage said that as they were in there, that all those around, and they couldn't see each other, but they could hear. He said they would start singing songs. You know what songs they sung? They didn't sing songs of the day that were popular on the radio. They sang the church hymns that they heard growing up. And he said, so we really kind of had our own worship service, even though we couldn't see each other. But we sang those songs, and it motivated us to continue. Someone else said, well, what was the first thing that you thought about? He said, I thought when I get home, I'm going down to the restaurant down the street and grabbing a hamburger. Right? Because it brought him hope. So a leader is going to, as Napoleon Bonaparte said, he's going to project that vision forward. Rosalind Carter said, a great leader takes people where they do not necessarily want to go, but they ought to be. Now think about that for a moment. A great leader, Not just a leader, but a great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but they ought to be. Now you think about that. There's places that we want to go and we feel that we need to go, but yet what happens? Well, we got to get out of our comfort zone a little bit. We got to get those reminders a little bit. We got to do those a little bit. And sometimes what we do is we revert backwards a little bit. Remember the time that you probably told your parents when they said, we're going to do this, and you said, I don't want to. You may have said it once. You may not even got the full sentence out. Remember the time that your child said that to you? This is where we're going to go. I don't want to. Well, why not? I just don't want to. Why? I'm happy here. I don't want to. I don't want to go into fellowship hall and sit in those weird chairs. I don't want to, right? So we think about some of these things. Some of you will get that joke just a little bit later. But what you think about some of these things going down the road, because a leader is going to take you where you ought to be. Why? Because a leader understands who you are. Look at the passage that Hunter read a moment ago. We love Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down. You ever think about that? Not that he allows me. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. Leading is out in front of and giving the direction towards. So when you think about where do we need to be? So let me give you 4 examples. I'm going to give you 4 points. I'm going to be done. Okay? The thing that we talked about leadership. Somebody always says this. Well, I am not a leader. Understand this. Leaders are not born. Leaders are made. Now there are some people who have the characteristics of a leader from birth. But that doesn't mean they're a leader. Because some people have characteristics of leaders are horrible leaders. And I'll give you one name and you'll absolutely agree. Adolf Hitler. He had the characteristics all the way through. Why was he able to achieve so much? Well, it didn't start one day when, World War II happened. It started all the way back when he was little. Able to persuade those. I'll give you another one. It sounds weird to say this. I don't want anybody to kind of freak out. I did some studying over the past couple of weeks with Jim Jones. Remember Jim Jones, the Kool-Aid Jim Jones? Okay, everybody who's under the age of 30 went, what's Kool-Aid and who's Jim Jones? Okay, if you Google it, it'll get weird. Why was he able to do what he was able to do? And when you look at that, that didn't just happen one day. It was over the course of time. But Jim Jones was a great leader. He was probably a great salesman. But for the wrong reasons. So we all have the ability to lead somebody somewhere. In fact, here's one for you, marriage. Have you ever thought about this one? Marriage is about leadership. We don't necessarily talk about that too much, but it is. And by the way, these 4 categories or these 4 areas that you're going to see are going to come back in the very last question I'm going to ask you. It says husbands are to love their wives, but they are to present their wives to Jesus like Jesus has done to the church. That's leadership. That's what that is. That is leading in the right direction. That's what that is. That is the idea of husbands. There's so much responsibility in Ephesians chapter 5 that we overlook it. I'll give you the key to it a little bit later in some aspects. But the husband is going to be the head of the wife. It says that in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. What does that mean? That's pure leadership is what that is. To go in the right direction. Why do you think that God probably got upset at Adam and Eve? You ever look at who he told not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? You ever think about who's supposed to take responsibility? Who was there first? Who knew the pattern of the garden? Who knew the things that are there? Who knew the boundaries? Who knew the animals and everything else? Was it Eve? It was Adam. That's why when you get into the Bible and you dig into it a little bit more, you get into 1 and 2 Corinthians, and it says that Adam sinned. How did Adam sin? Adam left his responsibility. So you're talking about the power of that responsibility. It's just like this one. It's just like the power of parenting. The Bible says parents bring their children up in a nurture and the admonition of the Lord. Fathers provoke not them to wrath. That's leading. That's guiding those children in that path. And we all know, and no one doesn't know somebody in this category. We all know some bad parents and some bad kids. Because we say this phrase, and it's common in our language, that apple didn't fall far from the tree. Then in the South, once again, you followed up with bless their heart. Because that's we know that. And because you see it, you go, oh, that's not going to be good. I just know it. The Bible deals a lot with this, even back in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 6. The idea of Deuteronomy chapter 6 is basically, it says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one God. And that is a call to action to the people, to love God and to do that. But the next few verses of Deuteronomy chapter 6, it says, you are to teach these to your children. Which is very, very interesting, because you're to teach them. You're to teach them when you rise up and when you lie down, when you walk in the way, when you sit at the table. You're to have those moments of opportunity because you're leading your children down the path. By the way, grandparents, you're not off the hook in the book of Deuteronomy. In the book of Deuteronomy, it also says that you're to teach your children's children. So I know grandkids are absolutely wonderful and they're lovely and they can do no wrong. Right? They can burn down the house and they'll just live there. What a beautiful fact. But there's still a teaching aspect that's there, right? Why? Why is there a teaching aspect? Because there's wisdom. There's wisdom, and I know every grandparent will agree with this, right? There's wisdom that we need to share with our grandchildren because our children haven't learned it all yet. So we're going to help them down the line. That's what we're going to be able to do. So you find out this idea of leadership goes beyond just parent-child. It even digs into the grandparent relationship. Here's another one. We all lead other people, and especially to Jesus. And I want you to remember this verse. We're going to come back to it. Acts chapter 8 and verse 31. That one right there. That's the story of Philip and the Ethiopian treasurer. Now, if you remember, the Ethiopian treasurer's come to Jerusalem to worship. He's heading back to Ethiopia. Pretty long journey. Pretty rich. Or somebody's pretty rich. Because he's reading from the scroll of Isaiah in the chariots. It's probably a pretty big chariot. And as he's reading from that, there's Philip. Philip runs to meet the chariot, and Philip says, do you understand what you're reading? Remember what he says? Sometimes we think he says, how can I unless somebody teaches me? He actually says, how can I unless someone guides me or leads me? Basically, what he just said is, I have no knowledge of what's going on. I need some help. I need somebody to be my guide to direct me in the path of the way that I need to go as I read this. He says, I need that guide. When we share the gospel with somebody else, we're helping to become their guide. We're helping to show them the way. Now, we do this in other aspects of life. If we're going on a trip, let's say we go on a trip to a place that we've never been, that I've never been, you have, okay? You've been, and I say, I don't know what I'm doing, help me out here. Where do I need to go? And in what way do I need to go? Like you show me the directions. Because probably what we're going to do is we're not going to always depend upon Google, because Google has a tendency to be wrong. I remember in South Carolina for a long time, every GPS pulled up our house 3 doors down from where it actually was. And I would tell people, and the reason I would tell them this is because I've been to my house. And I would say, it's going to pull you up 3 houses down the road, keep driving, count 3 houses on the left. You know what everybody would say? Okay. And we would sit there and we would wait. Somebody would be coming over. We'd sit there and we'd go, they're not here yet. I know where they're at. I would walk out in the cul-de-sac. I would look down and I'd go, there they are. They're 3 houses down, sitting in their driveway, trying to figure out where we are. And they said, well, I know what you said, but I know what technology did. Well, good luck with that. So that's the reason I pull this out, is when we lead others, there's still an aspect that we have to go through. Finally, we talk about leadership in the church. We're going to end our series on leadership talking about leadership in the church. We're going to talk about elders. We're going to talk about deacons. We've talked about those before. I've talked about them at least twice, maybe 3 times since I've been here. I think Kevin has done the same. And so we're going to talk about those as well. So these are the categories that you probably fit into in one way or another. And the reason I say, you say, okay, well, I'm not married, okay, don't have kids. Oh, there you go, right there. If we're supposed to share Jesus, then we're guiding those people that are there. Let me give you 4 quick ones, then we're going to be done. I'm going to ask you 4 quick ones, 2 questions, and we're going to be over, all right? So when it comes down to leadership, what does the church need in leadership? Here's the first thing the church needs, and I've seen this in every place that we've ever been. The church needs a desire to get better, not a desire to remain complacent, not a desire to just kind of be happy where we're at, not a desire to just kind of maintain and kind of sit back and think, we've got it good. Because do you remember the parable in the Bible, the rich fool? The rich fool we always think is about money. It's more than money, and it's more than the barns. Remember, he has all these things, and he says, I'm just going to build bigger barns to store all my crops, and I'm going to sit back, and I'm going to say, just eat, drink, and be merry. Your soul, you've saved up for many years, everything's fine. Tonight, he says, your soul is required of you. He put all the emphasis on I. Do you remember that? I've done this, and I've done this, and I've done that. There needs to be a desire to get better. If everyone had a desire to get better because they knew that they could get better, it would completely change. It completely changed the way that we think and the things that we do. Several weeks ago, actually a year and a half ago, it seems like a couple of weeks, because I remember the conversation of where I was. I was in a place and somebody came up to me and we were just talking, and they said, hey, where I'm working, they want me to be a manager. I said, that's awesome. He said, I can't do it. I said, okay, number one, I don't deal in that. I don't deal in can'ts. Don't tell me can't. He says, why? And I said, because I can tell you can't do anything. I can make up stuff. And so we kept talking a little bit, and I just asked this question. I said, hey, do you really want to get better? He said, yeah. I said, okay, do you really have a desire to get better? He said, yeah. I said, what happens if you do this? What happens a year from now? Very simple question. You know what the simple question happened? All of a sudden his eyes lit up and he said, do you know what I can do for my family? I got you, hook, line, and sinker. Right there we go. Well, why? Because you got to put that vision out there. Remember we talked about the power of vision? Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 18 says, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there's no forward thinking, the people perish. That's why a lot of people aren't happy about life, because they don't see what's coming. They don't see the great things that they can do in life. They don't see the possibilities of that. Just for instance, I don't know how many people are here this morning. Let's say there's 70. What happens if everyone brought one next Sunday? Well, if the air conditioner's fixed, we're going to have a full auditorium. If it's not fixed, we're going to have to find some more. We're going to find some more chairs. What then happens if in 3 weeks everyone that you brought, and you too, what happens if everyone brought somebody else to bring with them? And you go, Chris, that's like 280 people. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to be able to find my pew. I'm not going to be able to park in the same parking space as I have before. There's going to be more people in the foyer hovering by the doors when I walk through. Right? But see, when you do that, and when you see that, when you start casting that vision, that's why it's important. So here's the thing. When we talk about leadership, there has to be a desire to get better. Here's the second one, and this is the one I want you to remember. This is why I asked you to open to Hebrews chapter 13. And this is the moment of where I really want you to see in Hebrews chapter 13, one of the most powerful things about leadership that we do not talk about. And all of us have gone through this process. All of us have seen this happen in our lives. All of us have been part of a sports team where you've seen this happen. This is what it says in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 17. It says, now let me preface this. I want to preface the beginning of verse 17. Many times we only hear the very beginning. And we kind of turn that switch off and we forget the end. Okay? So when we turn that switch off and we forget the end, that's sometimes the most important part. It says in Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 17, it says to obey your leaders and submit to them, for they're keeping watch over your souls. And usually we stop right there. But notice the next part. The next part says, as those who will have to give an account. So obey your leaders and submit to them, so they're watching over your souls, because they're going to have to give an account. We talk about the responsibility of leadership in a few weeks. The responsibility of leadership is this. You're giving the account of somebody else's soul. When we talk about that in terms, and we always think elders, and I'm going to change that here in a second. We think about that, the elders are going to have to give an account for your soul. So when you look at that responsibility, that's a pretty big responsibility. It's gigantic. And who are they going to give an account to? God. Now you think about that for a moment. Think about what the elders are going to have to say when they stand in front of God about you. You know, consider that for a moment. And if you think, well, Chris, that's for elders. How about this one? James says, let not many of you become teachers, because teachers will receive the stricter judgment. What's the stricter judgment? You're teaching somebody about the gospel of Christ. What happens, and I'm not here to guilt trip anybody, I'm not here to put undue pressure. What happens if you lead them in the wrong direction? What happens if you go down a wrong path? It's extremely frustrating, and I'm going to get very personal. It's extremely frustrating to me to sometimes to hear people say that when it comes to a Bible class, and I know sometimes it happens, okay? I hear people in a Bible class say, we're just going to wing it. We're just going to wing it? If you walked in to catch a plane out of Atlanta, and you're flying to London, and they get an announcement, and they go, flight 2732 to London, we can't find a pilot, but we found a stewardess, and they're just going to kind of wing it. Would you go, this sounds awesome, let's go? Or would you go, what did they just say? And if you don't think that's true, what about this? You go down to Jack's to eat, and you say, I would like a number 7. I want those 2 cheeseburgers, and I want everything on them. I want some fries, and I would like as typical Americans, I want all that food and a Diet Coke. And they go, well, we don't have anybody making cheeseburgers, but we found this dude outside, and he's just going to wing it. You go, no, it's okay, right? Or would you go, I'm ready to meet Jesus, let's go for it? Because when we talk about that, there's an accountability that goes in leadership, from Bible class teachers to elders. But notice the end of verse 17. This is what I want you to remember. It says, I'm going to read it again. Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account. Here it is, next sentence. Let them do this with joy, not with groaning, that it may be, for that it would be of no advantage to you. So I want you to think about this for a minute. Everybody here wants a happy, lovely family. You want your kids to always listen. You want your children. That was everybody's dream, that when you said, would you please empty the trash, that your children would go, I would love to, Mother and Father. It would be my honor. They would always keep their room cleaned. They would always, if they left a handprint on a window, that they would wipe it off. And when your grandchildren came along, you still have that desire. You got a little bit more leeway, right? Or for those of you who've ever taught in school, that's what you wanted out of kids in school. You wanted to walk in and you wanted them to say, oh, I will be the greatest student ever. But instead you walked in sometimes and you went, that person's not going to make it, that person's not going to make it. Right? And why do we want all that? Because when there's unity and there's peace and there's cooperation and there's opportunity, things go absolutely smoothly. So we can go back and we go, this has been an absolute joy. It's been a tremendous time to be here, right? What do most people say? I am so glad I made it out alive. Right? What does that verse say about church? Now, I'm not speaking for the eldership. I'm not going to, I'm one of the elders here. I'm not going to speak as an elder. I'm going to speak as a preacher for a minute. And the fact is this. A lot of things come down to great followers. Because you know what adults are? Adults are just grown-up kids. Now, I know you're going to go, duh. But no, it's a different duh. A kid, hey, you probably shouldn't do that. But I want to. You shouldn't do that. That's not good for you. That's not going to turn out well in the end. You don't tell me what to do. You know the only difference that sometimes in church work is now you're eye-to-eye level. That's not a good thing for you to do. Well, I want to. I wouldn't do that if I were you. You don't tell me what to do. You ain't the boss of me. And you think I'm kidding. We're going to see some of that in the Old Testament. We'll roll that into the New Testament. So when we talk about there has to be a desire to get better, there has to be great followers. And I'll leave you with a question here in a minute. But then there has to be qualified leaders. Not all leaders are qualified. There has to be qualified leaders. Once again, you wouldn't want a stewardess flying your plane if somebody's just going to wing it. And there's qualifications in the Bible because there's a reason behind those. I mean, imagine what would happen in churches if God would have said, just get whoever you want. You think about that for a moment. If we were able to truly do everything that we just kind of wanted to do, how comfortable would we make everything for us and not challenging at all? Right? Because we like to live in our comfortability. But here's number 4. I'll leave you with number 4. Number 4 is what needs to happen is there has to be leading leaders and willing followers. So the question that we have to ultimately ask is this. I will leave you with these 2 questions. You'll hear some of these verses again. But the first question is this: is what kind of leader are you? You're leading somebody somewhere in some place at some point in your life. What kind of leader are you? You're leading your family, you're leading your children, you're leading your grandchildren, you're leading, we use this phrase, we're leading by example. What kind of leader are you? Because that's going to say a whole lot about who follows you. And to the extent we're all following someone, right? And if you don't believe me, we're all following Jesus. We're all following God. We're all following all the things that are written in the Bible. But what kind of follower are you? Are you a follower that makes it a joy for the leaders? Now we all know this. If you've ever been in any position, and I have worked in jobs outside of preaching, okay? And sometimes I've been under a boss that just makes it absolutely horrible. Okay? Other times I've been leading groups of people that I'm not saying I wanted them to go away, but I wanted to give them a bear hug until all the breath went out of them. That's all I'm saying. Because you knew, right? You kind of know. And to bring a further example, when we moved to South Carolina, I made a mistake, and I wrote to the principal of the school, and I said, I will volunteer anytime that you need me. Carrie dropped that letter off at 1 o'clock. At 1:01, my phone was ringing. Mr. Gallagher, we need a chaperone for a field trip. I said, field trip? I can do that. I started thinking. I remember how I was on field trips. It's going to be interesting. And so we're going to the aquarium. I thought, great, nice enclosed location, going to be air conditioned, no problems at all. I get there, a teacher walks over and he says, hey, here's the deal. A counselor walks over and he says, we're going to give you all these boys. I said, why all these boys? I said, everybody else has like some girls, and all, but I have all these boys. He said, because all these boys need male leadership. Also known as all these boys need a whipping halfway through the day. And I said, I don't want these boys. He says, you got to do it. So I said, okay, here's what we're going to do, right? We're going to have some fun with this. We're going to see what we can do. I will tell you that was one of the greatest field trips of my entire life. Now, one of my kids got taken into that group as well with a couple others. We had a lot of fun that day. And at the end of that, somebody said, hey, how was it? Because you had, and they listed the names of the kids that they had. And I said, it was an absolute joy. And they said, why? And I said, did you know that this kid likes football? Did you know that this kid does this? You know that this kid does this? You know that this kid does this? They said, what's it all about? And I said, listen, I was those kids. In fact, I still am. You guys just don't know it. I'm just in this bigger form now. But those kids became great followers simply because you just had to tweak them a little bit. You just had to figure out who they are. And it became a great trip for everybody. It became such a great trip. I walked up to school to pick up my kids after that. One of the kids walks up and he says, yo, Mr. Gallagher, what's up, my brother? I said, hey, man, how you doing, Ray Vaughn? He said, pretty good. And his mom said, who is that guy? He's nice, Mr. Gallagher. He's pretty cool. Don't worry about it. And the reason I bring that up to you is somebody taught me that a long time ago. Because they didn't step on my head as a leader. Because they didn't beat me with anything. They said, if you learn to be a follower, then you're going to learn to be a leader. Because most of the times, in the 7 congregations that I have worked with, in the past 28 years, I've learned this. And I was not asked to say this. This is not a reflection on Kevin or Jack. Most people who complain about the eldership are the ones who need to learn to be followers. They're the ones who need to learn that their game has to be stepped up. This is where the step up occurs first, not up here. Okay, same thing, and I'm not here for any public education statements. The same thing in public education. Sometimes we got to stop blaming the teacher and we got to blame the parents. Because it's not our kids, it's not the teacher. It's those other parents who need to beat their kids more often. You know, it's the same thing with adults. It's the same thing in your work. Sometimes it's not the manager, sometimes it's the employees. And I will say most of the time, because you go to McDonald's, buy a Happy Meal, most people aren't happy. And the reason is because they're not a good follower of happiness. They may be being led great, but the following aspect is horrible. So I would encourage you to go home and ask yourself these questions, but specifically, once again, look at Hebrews chapter 13 and verse 17. I want to read this again, because as we talk about leadership, you can't lead without followers. So here it is again. It says, obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will give an account. But here's the last sentence. Let them do this with joy and not with groaning, for it would be no advantage to you. So, with that being said, what kind of leader are you? What kind of follower are you? And let me rearrange the last question for one moment. What kind of follower of Jesus are you? Something for you to think about, something I want you to think about over the next little while. As we talk about leadership, we're going to talk an awful lot about Jesus' powerful leadership to 12 individuals of all different makes, models, sizes, beliefs, personalities, frustrations, and happiness. And we know them as the apostles, those who changed the course of the world, all because of the help of Jesus. And we're going to find out that we have that ability as well. But Kevin has picked a song of invitation. If there's anything we can do to help you out this morning, we want to do that. If you want to make your way to the front, we'll pray with you. We'll do what we can for you, baptize you for the remission of your sins, so you can begin following Jesus. But if you have a need this morning, I want you to make it known by coming to the front while together we stand and as we sing.